Okay, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling climate change adaptation and resilience in the Indo-Pacific.
It sounds complex.
It is, but fascinating too. We've got a ton of reports, research, even some hot-off-the-press stuff from COP29.
Copy 29, huh? So, cutting edge insights.
Absolutely. And you might be surprised to learn that almost half of global emissions, they're coming from developing Asia.
Which makes this region kind of crucial to the whole climate puzzle.
Exactly. And what's really interesting, the Asia-Pacific, it's not just a big emitter.
It's also incredibly vulnerable to the consequences. We're talking impacts way beyond global averages, like hotter temperatures, those crazy floods and typhoons. They could be twice as destructive.
Double whammy, right. And it's not just the environment that's taking a hit. We're looking at major economic fallout, too.
Absolutely. Some countries could see their GDP shrink, get this, by as much as 41% by 2100.
Whoa, 41%. That's massive.
Yeah.
And that kind of economic vulnerability, it just makes existing problems even tougher, right?
Sure.
Like what we see in the Sahel region.
The Sahel, yeah, it's a prime example. Climate change is definitely a factor in the instability there.
Our sources, they point to this trend of climate change basically fueling conflict in that region.
It's like a chain reaction. Climate change ramps up resource scarcity that sparks these small conflicts, and then boom, transnational groups, they exploit the situation. Take those jihadist groups, for instance. They're using local grievances, especially among nomadic pastoralists, to escalate those conflicts.
Not good. And speaking of resources, food security, that's another biggie that keeps popping up.
Huge issue. 2 out of 3 people in sub-Saharan Africa are already food insecure. And imagine the population's set to double by 2050. All while climate change makes it harder to actually produce enough food.
So what's the solution? Can we even turn things around on the food front?
We can, but it takes serious investment. We need to boost cereal production, focus on irrigation, fertilizer, make sure grain storage is up to par.
Okay, so targeted investments, that's key. But zooming out a bit, what about solutions on a grander scale? How do we build resilience against all these challenges?
Well, one concept that keeps surfacing, it's this idea of positive peace. Basically, nations with more peace, they can withstand shocks better, recover faster.
So it's not just about avoiding war, right? It's about creating peaceful societies that can adapt to change.
Exactly. Positive peace strengthens social systems, improves governance, promotes the kind of resource management that's essential when dealing with climate change.
Like laying a strong foundation for a house so it can weather any storm.
Perfect analogy.
So a positive peace, that's our bedrock. But what about specific initiatives, things happening on the ground, what's working?
Oh, there are some great examples. There's the Pacific Regional Climate Resilience Transport Program. They're being proactive, integrating climate considerations right into those infrastructure projects.
Building resilience in from the start instead of reacting to disasters after they hit.
Smart move.
Yep.
And then there's Brazil's first water cisterns program. They're tackling water security head-on by building infrastructure that's climate resilient.
Very targeted. And there's that Guinean program, too. They're weaving climate risk assessments into local development planning. So climate resilience is built into the decision-making at every level.
Exactly. Makes a lot of sense.
But beyond these individual projects, are there any bigger strategies, approaches that we should be aware of?
Nature-based solutions, or NBS for short, they're gaining a lot of traction. Basically, using the power of nature to provide a whole array of benefits.
So working with nature, not against it. What are some examples of these nature-based solutions?
Wetland restoration, sustainable forest management, climate-smart agriculture, all things that can be integrated into larger adaptation strategies.
And according to our sources, there's a big financial upside to these NBS, especially in agriculture, forestry, wetland management.
Oh, absolutely. The carbon market potential is huge. Investors are starting to pay attention. They're seeing that these nature-based solutions, they can deliver both financial returns and those positive environmental and social impacts.
Win-win. But even with all these promising solutions, funding for adaptation, that still seems to be a major hurdle. Our sources, they highlight this gap between what's needed and what's actually available.
It's a critical issue, but there's a growing movement towards getting the private sector involved in climate adaptation. It's not just a public sector responsibility anymore. Businesses can and should be part of the solution.
So how do we get them on board? What are the mechanisms?
We're seeing sustainable debt markets, green bonds, and transition finance all gaining momentum. New and innovative ways to attract private capital for these climate-resilient projects.
Diversifying the funding landscape, tapping into new sources. But what about governments? What's their role in all this?
Governments are crucial for setting the stage. They need to create a more favorable environment for private investment.
Like laying down the groundwork so the private sector can step in and do its thing.
Precisely. And speaking of policy tools, carbon pricing mechanisms are becoming increasingly important. The EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, for example, these are designed to incentivize emissions reductions and generate revenue that can be channeled towards climate adaptation.
It sounds like a powerful tool, but also pretty complex.
It is, but it's gaining traction, essentially putting a price tag on carbon using market forces to drive change.
So summing it all up, the Indo-Pacific is facing a whole web of climate challenges. But our sources also highlight the opportunities for proactive adaptation.
Absolutely. And one thing's for sure, resilience isn't just about building physical stuff. It's about strengthening social systems, fostering peace, finding new and innovative ways to finance these solutions. And, stepping back a bit, our sources also got into the nitty-gritty of the economic impact of climate change in this region. Did you know that Asia-Pacific is projected to experience even more intense climate change effects than, the global average?
Seriously, that bad, huh? What makes the Asia-Pacific so vulnerable?
Well, for one, it's got this trifecta of threats. Rising sea levels, those temperature increases, and extreme weather events that just keep getting worse. Typhoons, for instance. These are all going to hit the region's economies hard.
Yeah, one report even predicted that by 2070, if emissions stay high, annual flood losses could reach,
Yeah.
wait for it, $1 trillion.
Yeah.
A trillion. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around a number that big.
It is a pretty staggering statistic, really underscores why investing in climate resilience is so important. And it's not just about, protecting buildings and infrastructure. It's about protecting people's livelihoods, entire communities.
Right. And our sources also highlighted how vulnerable those climate-dependent sectors are. Agriculture, forestry, fisheries. It's kind of double whammy, isn't it? They're impacted by climate change, but they also contribute to those greenhouse gas emissions.
Absolutely. Agriculture, for example. It's a major source of methane emissions, especially from rice cultivation and livestock, but it's also super sensitive to changes in temperature and rainfall.
So it's this balancing act, right? Trying to reduce emissions from these sectors while also making them more resilient to the changes that are already happening.
Exactly. And that's where innovation comes in, adopting sustainable practices. Our sources talked a lot about climate-smart agriculture, increasing productivity, building resilience, and reducing emissions, all at the same time.
Yeah, I read about some cool stuff with improved rice cultivation practices. Apparently, they can significantly reduce methane emissions.
That's promising. And there are other things, too. Sustainable forest management, agroforestry, water-efficient irrigation. It's all about working with nature, not against it.
And it seems like technology has a big part to play, too. The sources mentioned digital innovations and how they could really boost climate resilience.
Technology is becoming increasingly important. Think early warning systems, precision agriculture, data-driven climate modeling. All these can help us manage risks better and adapt more effectively.
Sounds like a lot of potential, but also a lot of complexity. Navigating climate change in the Asia-Pacific, it's not going to be easy.
It's definitely a challenge. But the good news is there's more awareness now, more people involved. From governments and businesses to local communities, everyone's starting to work together towards a more climate-resilient future.
So it's all about collective action, collaboration.
Exactly. Recognizing that climate change, it's not just an environmental problem, it's an economic problem, a social problem, a human problem, really.
Which brings us back to that concept of positive peace.
Right. Building peaceful, inclusive societies. That's crucial for addressing the root causes of vulnerability. That's how we create a more sustainable, equitable future for everyone.
Our sources also dove into the whole finance side of things. They pointed out this big gap between what's needed for adaptation, especially in developing countries, and the funding that's actually available.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme. While there has been some progress, mobilizing funds from both public and private sources, it's just not enough. We need to find new ways to bridge that gap.
And our sources highlighted this growing interest in getting the private sector more involved in climate adaptation, tapping into all that capital and steering it towards these climate-resilient projects.
Exactly. Public funding alone, it's not going to cut it. We need to unlock the potential of private investment to really scale things up.
But how do you convince private investors to put their money into adaptation? It's not always seen as, the most profitable venture.
That's where clever government policies come in, innovative financial mechanisms. We need to make these climate-resilient investments more attractive.
So green bonds, sustainable debt markets, blended finance where you combine public and private funding to reduce risk.
Yeah.
All good ideas.
Definitely. They're all promising approaches. Governments also need to step up, set clear policies, offer incentives, remove those barriers to investment, make it clear that investing in climate resilience, it's not just the right thing to do, it's also smart business.
Yeah, send a strong message that climate resilience, it's good for the planet and good for the bottom line.
Precisely. And we need to change our thinking. Investing in adaptation isn't just about avoiding losses. It's about creating new opportunities, economic growth, innovation, jobs. It's about building a future that's both sustainable and prosperous.
Our sources also talked about carbon pricing mechanisms, like carbon taxes and emissions trading schemes, as a way to, push decarbonization and generate some revenue for climate action.
Carbon pricing is becoming a big deal. It can really speed up the transition to a low-carbon economy. By putting a price on carbon emissions, you're basically internalizing the cost of pollution, giving businesses a financial incentive to reduce their emissions.
And that revenue, where does that go?
It can fund a whole range of things: adaptation efforts, developing clean technologies, even providing aid to communities that are most vulnerable to climate change.
So it's like creating a system that accurately reflects the true cost of carbon emissions, a system that actually encourages sustainable practices.
Exactly. It's about fixing a broken market and making sure the polluter pays.
Our sources also stress the importance of international cooperation, right? Climate change, it's a global problem, needs a global response.
Absolutely. No one country can solve this on its own. We have to work together, reduce emissions, share knowledge, and support those who are hit hardest by climate change.
And it's not just about governments, right? Businesses, NGOs, individuals, we all have a role to play.
Totally. It's about fostering that sense of shared responsibility globally. We're all in this together, working towards a sustainable, resilient future.
Our sources also got into the role of international organizations like the UNFCCC and the IPCC. They're kind of the conductors of the Global Climate Action Orchestra.
They really are. They bring everyone together, set those global targets, and keep everyone informed about the latest science. They're essential for the whole climate action framework to function.
The UNFCCC, for instance, they're the ones behind those annual COP meetings, where world leaders hash out climate action and negotiate those big international agreements.
And the IPCC, they synthesize all the research on climate change, giving policymakers that up-to-date evidence to make informed decisions. They're the translators, taking complex science and turning it into actionable insights.
Our sources also mentioned the global stocktake, which was a big deal at COP28 in Dubai. Remind us what that is again.
Sure. The global stocktake is basically a progress report. It assesses how we're doing collectively in meeting those Paris Agreement goals, helps us see where we're falling short, celebrate our successes, and encourage countries to aim higher.
So it's about accountability, making sure everyone's pulling their weight and showing what still needs to be done.
Exactly. Keeps the momentum going and ensures we're constantly striving to do more.
Our sources also touched on those ongoing negotiations around Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the one about international carbon markets.
Right, Article 6. It's about creating a framework for countries to work together, achieve those emission reduction targets using market-based mechanisms.
But it seems like they're still ironing out the kinks, right?
There are definitely some sticking points, mainly ensuring the environmental integrity of these markets, preventing double counting, making sure one emission reduction isn't claimed by multiple countries.
So transparency, accountability, making sure these carbon markets actually deliver.
Absolutely. It's complex, but it's crucial if we want to use market forces to drive down emissions effectively.
And our sources highlighted the important role of those non-state actors, too. Businesses, NGOs, they're pushing for change, right?
They're critical. They act as these catalysts, pushing for ambitious policies, developing new solutions, and raising awareness about climate change.
The Climate Action Network, or CAN, they were mentioned as a big voice in these international climate negotiations.
CAN is a global network of NGOs, and they do a fantastic job of holding governments accountable. They advocate, they release their eco-newsletters every day during the negotiations, and they even have these Fossil of the Day awards, calling out those who are seen as blocking progress.
Sounds like they use a good mix of advocacy, information, even a bit of humor to get things moving.
Exactly. They're a great example of how these non-state actors can really make their voices heard on the global stage and push for real change.
Okay, so let's zoom in on a few specific countries. Indonesia, for example. The report mentioned they're particularly vulnerable to climate change. especially those rising sea levels and extreme weather events.
That's right. Indonesia, being an archipelago, is really on the front lines. Rising sea levels threaten their coastal communities and infrastructure, and heavy rainfall can trigger floods and landslides. Devastating stuff.
And the report pointed out that Indonesia's agriculture sector, which is huge for their economy, is also super vulnerable.
Absolutely. Changes in temperature and rainfall, they mess with crop yields, disrupt planting cycles, make pests and diseases more common. It all has a huge impact on food security and people's livelihoods.
So what are they doing about it? Any adaptation measures in place or in the works?
Indonesia's looking at a bunch of strategies. They're strengthening their coastal defenses, developing crops that can handle drought, improving early warning systems for extreme weather events.
And what about the agricultural sector specifically? Anything being done to address their vulnerability?
They've been promoting climate-smart agriculture practices, trying to make the sector more resilient and reduce its environmental impact.
Sounds like Indonesia is taking this seriously,
Yeah.
making real efforts to tackle these challenges head on.
They are. The government has committed to reducing emissions and enhancing climate resilience. And there's a growing awareness of the need for action at all levels of society.
So lots of challenges, but at least they've got a plan, a sense of direction.
Exactly. And you know, what Indonesia is doing, it offers valuable lessons for other countries in the region and globally facing similar risks. They're a case study in resilience and adaptation in a changing world.
It's encouraging to see how Indonesia is tackling these issues. Really shows how climate change is global, but the solutions, they often happen locally.
Absolutely. And speaking of local, I think there's a really important piece of the climate action puzzle we haven't touched on much. The human element.
The human element. Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's remembering that climate change isn't just about data points and graphs. It's about people, their lives, their cultures, even their survival. We need to zoom in, remember the human cost of all this.
I like that. Our sources really drove that point home, when they talked about the social and economic impacts, especially on vulnerable communities. It's easy to get caught up in the science and policy, but yeah, we can't forget about the people.
Exactly. We can't just build seawalls and, engineer drought-resistant crops. That's important, but we also need to invest in people, give them the knowledge, the resources to adapt, to build resilience in their own communities.
So building local capacity, supporting leaders at the grassroots level, making sure those adaptation strategies are inclusive, equitable, nobody gets left behind.
That's the goal. And understanding the social dynamics, that's key too. In places where conflict is already happening, climate change just throws fuel on the fire, creates more tension, more instability. We have to be mindful of that.
Like what the report said about the Sahel region. Resource scarcity, climate change, it's all feeding into existing conflicts.
Exactly. In situations like that, peace building, conflict resolution, they become essential parts of any effective climate adaptation plan. Addressing the root causes, not just putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms.
Right, because climate change is intertwined with so many other issues. Social, economic, political. It's not isolated.
Nope, it's all connected, needs a holistic approach.
Which leads to another point our sources brought up, the need for a just and equitable transition to a low-carbon economy. We got to make sure everyone benefits from this transition, and those who can least afford it aren't stuck footing the bill.
That's a core principle of climate action. Nobody gets left behind, especially those who are most vulnerable to climate impacts and economic upheaval.
Like those workers in fossil fuel industries. They'll need support to transition to new jobs, in renewables and such.
Absolutely. And communities that rely on climate-sensitive sectors like agriculture, fishing, they'll need help adapting, making sure they have the resources to make that shift successfully.
Building a future that's not just sustainable but fair.
Exactly. Just an equitable transition, it's a moral imperative and just plain practical. It's how we build social cohesion and make sure climate action is sustainable in the long run.
It also highlights that climate change, it's a global issue that demands a global response. Our sources really hammered that point home, the need for international cooperation.
Absolutely. No one country can do this alone. We have to work together, reduce emissions, share what we know, and support those who are most at risk.
And that cooperation, it's got to go beyond governments, right? Businesses, NGOs, individuals, everyone's got to be involved.
Totally. It's about building that global sense of shared responsibility. We're all in this together, building a sustainable, resilient future.
Our sources also discuss the role of finance. And that same problem keeps popping up. The gap between what's needed, especially in developing countries, and the funding that's actually there.
It's a huge challenge. We're seeing progress with mobilizing climate finance from both public and private sources, but it's not enough. We need to get creative, find new ways to bridge that gap.
They talked a lot about leveraging private sector investment for adaptation, tapping into all that capital, steering it towards climate-resilient projects.
Right, because public funding alone just won't cut it. We need to unleash the power of private investment to really scale up these efforts.
But how do you get private investors excited about adaptation? It's not always seen as, the most lucrative opportunity.
That's where those innovative financial mechanisms and smart policies come in. We need to make these investments more appealing.
So green bonds, sustainable debt markets, blended finance, those are all good strategies.
Absolutely. They're all promising approaches, de-risking investments, creating a better environment for private sector involvement. And governments, they can incentivize things, remove barriers, make it clear that investing in climate resilience is good for business, not just the planet.
Right, changing that mindset. Adaptation isn't just about preventing loss. It's about creating opportunity, growth, jobs. It's about a future that's both sustainable and prosperous.
Exactly.
Our sources also talked about carbon pricing, carbon taxes, emissions trading schemes, as a way to push for decarbonization and generate revenue for climate action.
Carbon pricing is a powerful tool. It can really accelerate the shift to a low-carbon economy. Putting a price on carbon, it makes polluting more expensive and gives businesses a financial reason to cut emissions.
And that revenue, it can be used to fund adaptation, clean tech development, even support vulnerable communities.
Right. Carbon pricing creates a system that reflects the true cost of those emissions. It's about fixing a broken market, making sure the polluter pays.
So wrapping up this deep dive into climate change adaptation and resilience, especially in the Indo-Pacific, what's the big takeaway? What do you want listeners to remember?
I think the main message is that while the challenges are huge, they're not impossible to overcome. We have the knowledge, the tools, the resources to build a climate-resilient future. What we need now is the will to act, to innovate, to work together. That's how we build a sustainable and just world.
Well said. It's a call to action for all of us. And as we've seen from all these sources, there's real momentum building, more innovation, and a growing understanding that climate action isn't just a responsibility, it's an opportunity. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you've gained some insights into the complexities of climate change adaptation and resilience, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but globally. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing for a more sustainable and resilient future for all of us.